Hello and welcome to The Professionals. Law firm advertising has had a checkered past. It is often instantly forgettable or overly critiqued, but not today. Langleys Solicitors has launched a bold new advertising campaign in its native Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Lee Grunnell, the Director of Marketing and BD at Langleys, who is going to tell us a little bit more. Lee, welcome to The Professionals.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be here.
Lee, for the benefit of those of us that may not be familiar with Langleys, I wonder if you could just briefly introduce yourself and your firm.
Absolutely. So I have been the marketing director at Langleys now for just over 2 years. We effectively have 3 divisions, sort of a commercial practice, which is as you can imagine, B2B offering, private law practice, which is majority B2C, and a residential conveyancing division, which actually is separately branded as home property lawyers. Offices in York and Lincoln, and predominantly focusing on that sort of north and east part of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and southern bits of the East Midlands.
Fantastic. So maybe to get right to the heart of this, why has Langleys launched this advertising campaign now? And what do you hope to achieve by this campaign?
So some fairly high level changes within the firm. So we sold our insurance team. They finally left us in January of this year. So obviously the firm in early this year was a very different firm than it used to be. As part of that sale, we'd been through a strategy process looking at, the new business as it is, which also had a new senior partner and new chief exec. What's the vision for the firm? What are our objectives? What do we want the next sort of 5 years or so to look like? So that sort of in itself felt like it was the right time to do something just to mark the fact that the firm was quite different. Specifically within that, in terms of the vision that we set, we sort of set a fairly sort of bold, overarching vision statement that we wanted to change people's perceptions about what it's like to work with and for a law firm. So there's an element of, how do we communicate that to the market? And sort of some of the specific objectives that we set as part of that vision and strategy. One was around sort of brand, which was to be the most recognized brand in our markets. So we instantly had 2 very clear sort of strategic pillars that we wanted to focus on. In terms of what we want to achieve, so we knew, or at least we instinctively felt, that our brand awareness wasn't as high as we wanted it to be, which was confirmed by some of the research that we did, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So one of those key objectives was, how do we build that brand awareness across all buyers in the market? The sort of some of the more specific objectives in the campaign, the main objective we had as part of the brief was to establish a point of difference between Langleys and about sort of 20, 25 competitor firms. That point of difference that we don't match the conventional perceptions of law firms, which links obviously directly to that vision statement. Also looking sort of slightly longer term, setting a platform for a consistent positioning for future campaigns as well. And in terms of kind of those sort of overall business impacts, things that we sort of measure in terms of new clients that we win. So increasing the number of new clients, increasing the number of instructions from those clients as well, were things that we'll be measuring sort of in the long term as well. So the main overarching objective was about that brand awareness, increasing that across all buyers in the market.
One of the things that struck me with the visuals I've seen from this campaign is just the very sort of entertaining play on words that you've adopted in there. I just wonder maybe if you can explain how you arrived at some of these assets and the visuals, and how the campaign is sort of manifesting itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did quite a lot of research in advance, both research into the market, I say, in terms of awareness of Langleys, and also competitor research as well. There were quite a few interesting things that came out from the competitor research. So we had, I think there were 23 firms that we looked at. But I mean, one of the interesting challenges for Langleys is having that presence in both Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. We've got competitors that we're up against in Lincolnshire who aren't in Yorkshire, and vice versa. And obviously then there are other firms as well that may not be based in those regions, but are sort of looking to win work there. So that's why, it may seem a little bit odd for a firm like Langleys to have so many competitors. So a few things sort of jumped out. So the obvious thing around use of colour. Unsurprisingly, the vast majority of firms, their dominant colours were blue and green. Yep. We have gold and claret in our colour palette, and they were some of the least used colours. So instantly that sort of focus on distinctiveness said, well, those are two of the colours that we need to use to be a bit bolder. None of the firms seemed to use that colour wave of sort of actually how do you blend from claret into the gold. They were all just those solid colours. None of them had any sort of motif or pattern. So we've got that sort of L pattern in the background going across. That was something that nobody else used. And then also no one else really was focusing on typography. All of their visual identity was imagery based. There wasn't a huge amount that was sort of based around narrative. So in that sort of almost sort of fairly boring sense of, okay, well, if we want to stand out, what does everybody else do? Let's do the opposite. It kind of gave us some of those aspects. The other thing, sort of in terms of the style, was, okay, if we want to change perceptions about what it's like to work with and for a law firm, we need to understand what that current perception is. And the idea of, and again from the research, that most people think it's complicated, it's hard, it's expensive, it's confusing. Okay, so if that's the current perception, what's the opposite? So we kind of brought all of those elements together in terms of an overall style. Very simple, straightforward language in that sort of classic David Ogilvy approach to, use the language that your customers speak in. And then again, basing it around our name, that idea of building distinctive assets. What's the, any other firm could, if they wanted to, choose to use claret or gold. They could use more typography than imagery. With so many adverts that you see, they could arguably be for any brand. You could take out one logo and put another logo in there. The one thing that none of our competitors can say is that they're called Langleys. No. So actually, if we base that around the Langleys name, we have something that is genuinely unique. And where we know that brand awareness is low, and that need to embed the Langleys name in people's minds, rather than just using the Langleys piece, using the Langleysy, it has that right sort of message, that right positioning. It's memorable in that it's got that play on words, and also it's more likely to, okay, people might not remember the name Langleys, but they may well remember Langleysy, and they'll be able to get to Langleys from that. So there's, like I said, that heavy research element sort of brought all of those elements together. In terms of how it's manifesting itself, so we've got a mix of outdoor, online, print, and radio. The idea that the more channels that you use, the more effective your campaign becomes, with that multiplicative impact. So that's going to run for probably the next sort of 3 to 4 months across a variety of those different media.
One of the things that always strikes me with law firms and advertising is getting partners engaged and bought in to concepts. They are quite conservative in a lot of firms, and your campaign is anything but conservative. How did you sell the idea to the firm, and what kind of reaction did you get?
So I think I mentioned I've been at Langleys just over 2 years now. So they've had 2 years of me banging on about how marketing communications works and how advertising works, and all of the research about the importance of reach and the importance of standing out and distinctive assets and all of that sort of stuff. So to an extent, I suspect I wore them down. But this was kind of building on years of kind of just trying to sort of embed some of those messages. The other thing, and this is where I think the research was really important. So I remember an old senior partner of mine when I first joined Beechcroft, as was DAC Beechcroft now, which was the first law firm that I worked with. He said to me, the thing you need to remember about working with lawyers is they never start anything from a blank sheet of paper. They've got a template or a precedent or case law or whatever it might be. And in some ways, marketing is similar in that, we do have good research now and evidence about how marketing works, how advertising works, what makes marketing communications effective. And I've sort of tried to in all of the conversations I have with all of the partners and lawyers, sort of bring that in so they can see some of those parallels. So I'm not just making something up because I think it sounds about right. It's based on solid research and evidence. So the research we did, both in terms of the market and competitors, was able, I think, sort of to take them through that logical step-by-step process of saying, okay, actually at the starting point, having all of the partners and the business services directors as well involved in the strategy process was good, because they all know what the vision for the firm is and they've all signed up to it. They know that we've set the objective to become the most recognized brand in our market, and they've all bought into it. So we've got that sort of solid starting point for why we're doing this. Being able to say, this is why we've used this color palette, this L pattern, the color wave, the type of language, because it will stand out versus our competitors who look and sound like this. This is why we've used this message, because this was the objective we set for the campaign. This is why we're using the sort of media that will give us the reach, because we know the importance of reaching all buyers in the market. All of that, we're able to kind of say, okay, so because A, B, C, and D, we've ended up at this outcome. And they're able, even if people don't necessarily personally like it, they're able to say, okay, I see how we got to that. And okay, may not be completely what I like or what I do, but I can see the rationale behind it. And so I think one thing that all of the partners, and particularly the partner working group that we had, really deserve a lot of credit for, was we said at the outset, we've got a brief here, we've got our primary objective for the campaign, we've got our supporting objectives. And whenever we're assessing or evaluating any of the work that's presented to us, what we don't want to do is ask, do we like it? What we need to do is ask, does it work? The agency that we worked with, GASP, the analogy they always use is parachutes. No one cares if they like a parachute or not. What matters is, does the parachute work? So having that kind of really well-defined brief at the outset, we were able to say, does this proposed route deliver this objective? If it does, fantastic, ticking the box. Whether we like it or not is slightly irrelevant. And yeah, so I was really surprised, actually, and like I say, kind of impressed that I would say 99% of the partners kind of saw it and went, yeah, that's great. One of them said it's bold and it's different and it stands out, and that's absolutely what we should be doing. So yeah, I've been really, really, really proud of the partner group. They've absolutely bought into it.
I mean, it's so important, isn't it? Putting in the groundwork first with any kind of marketing activity. You mentioned earlier on a little bit about how you're measuring the impact of the campaign, and I appreciate that the campaign is still very much in its infancy, but how are you looking to measure the impact and the return that you get from it?
So obviously we did the research at the start, so we know what our brand awareness was at the beginning. So, and I wouldn't envisage doing this for at least another 6 months, probably 9 to 12 months. We'll go back and do that measurement again and see, okay, has that shifted or not? Which would give us the test of, has it achieved its primary objective? We also we do a quarterly sort of KPI measure where we have sort of 4 or 5 sort of key metrics that we look at, and we look at, okay, what's the change year on year and what's the change quarter on quarter? So we're constantly measuring that, and we'd hope that we see those move in the right direction. And then looking at, you know, those sort of ultimate, what actually pays the bills metrics of revenue, number of instructions, new clients won, gross profit. We kind of obviously, you know, in conjunction with our finance team, measure those as well, so we can see the extent to which they move. And one of the things we do as part of the quarterly KPI, we actually look at just 2 particular measures plotted on a line graph over a 13-month rolling basis. So we're able to kind of say, okay, this is what our general trend line is. So this is what we would typically expect as our almost business as usual revenue. This is the point at which the campaign launched, and okay, what do we see changing as a result of that, to look at what the incremental revenue might be and the knock-on in profit. So there's a host of things that we almost measure anyway and had been doing, which gives us a good baseline. And then obviously the specific measurement we did at the start of the campaign, we can go back in due course and see, okay, how does that compare?
Yeah. You mentioned the campaign has got I think 4 or 5 month program. How do you see the campaign evolving? Is it going to stay for that period of time on the media that you've adopted, and do you have plans beyond that sort of 4 or 5 month window?
So there are 2 ad variations as part of it. One commercial, one private. I'd say it'll be just those 2 ads that run for, I'd say, the next 3-4 months. Our financial year runs April to March, so we're kind of already looking at a kind of budget setting and planning and strategy for next financial year. So we'll run exactly the same campaign, those 2 ad variations, at some point next year as well. We've got sort of a couple of shorter term, sort of more sales-led activation-based campaigns in the offing. They will follow the same effectively sort of creative route. So between those sort of short-term ones, and then just rerunning the Langleys brand campaign next year, hopefully that will start to build that familiarity with, these are the distinctive assets that you associate with Langleys. Obviously, we haven't done this before, so we don't have the familiarity of the Metro Golden Mare lion roar, or the Nike swoosh, or the apple with a bite out of it. So we're having to create that from the start and focus really on embedding those. So in terms of creative route, I would envisage very little, if any, change for the next certainly the next 12 months. Beyond that, as well, as we start trying to embed those sort of brand codes and distinctive assets in people's minds.
Fantastic. Well, Lee, we'll have to get you back to tell us how it went at some point next year. But thank you ever so much for joining the professionals and telling us about your campaign. It is really appreciated.
No, my pleasure. I hope it was useful.